What happens when a millionaire hides his fortune to find a woman who sees his heart, not his bank account? James Williams, a grieving widower and devoted single father, has it all, except someone to share his quiet life with. Tired of women who see his daughter as a burden and his love as a charity case, he disguises his identity and brings his little girl on every blind date. Rejected, judged, and written off, he nearly gives up, until one rainy afternoon, a kind-hearted librarian folds a paper crane and changes everything. The sun had just begun to dip behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors of the Williams estate. The house, a modern marvel of glass and stone nestled in the hills outside the city, stood quiet. Too quiet for a home that once echoed with laughter and soft lullabies. James Williams sat alone in his private study, framed by towering bookshelves and soft lamplight. His laptop screen glowed before him, illuminating his chiseled but tired face. The cursor blinked on a blank profile page of a dating site, an anonymous one, not one where the elite searched for acceptable matches. No, this was for real people, people who weren't drawn by flashy surnames or Forbes listings. He exhaled long and low and rubbed his temple. It had been 5 years since Natalie passed. 5 years of showing up as both mother and father. 5 years of politely declining setups by colleagues, refusing invites to charity galas, and brushing off loneliness as something for other men to worry about. But lately, it had become harder to ignore. Especially with Nadia. Just this morning, over breakfast, she'd asked with innocent eyes and a mouthful of cereal, "Daddy, don't you get lonely when I'm at school?" James had paused, spoon in hand, momentarily disarmed by her insight. "What makes you ask that, love?" She shrugged, stirring her chocolate milk with the handle of her spoon. "Because sometimes when I come home, you're just sitting there staring at your tea. And you look quiet." That word. Quiet. Not sad. Not empty. But somehow more profound. He hadn't answered her. Not really. He smiled and tickled her nose, changed the subject to art class, and made a mental note to get her more of those scented markers she loved. But the question stuck with him. Now here he was, on a Wednesday night, contemplating his first step back into a world he never really understood. Dating. But not as James Williams, the tech magnate. That wouldn't work. That name came with too many assumptions, too much baggage. He didn't want someone who saw dollar signs when they looked at him. He wanted someone who could meet his eyes and see a man still trying to learn how to live again. And most importantly, someone who would love Nadia, not tolerate her. He typed slowly. Name James. Occupation, freelance software consultant. Location, city outskirts. About me, widowed dad. Love good coffee, quiet mornings, and trying to keep up with my daughter's art projects. Looking to meet someone real. Not perfect, just honest. He stared at the words. They were true enough. Accurate, if not the whole truth. He clicked upload and selected a simple photo. One of him and Nadia at a park, both wearing matching beanies, laughing mid-swing. His smile was genuine. No private jets. No designer suits. Just a dad. As he hovered over the submit button, his office door creaked open, and Nadia peeked in, clutching a plush dragon with a missing wing. "Can I sleep in your bed tonight?" she asked. James smiled and opened his arms. "Of course." She ran to him, hopping into his lap as he spun the chair gently side to side. Her head rested against his chest, small and warm and safe. "What are you doing?" she mumbled, peeking at the laptop. He hesitated, then kissed the top of her head. "Something brave." She smiled sleepily. "Like a knight," he chuckled. "Something like that." With Nadia in his arms and 1,000 doubts in his mind, James clicked submit. The screen flashed, confirming his new profile. For the first time in years, he had taken a step toward something unknown. Not for wealth or strategy or expansion, but for the one thing he'd nearly given up on. Connection. James adjusted the collar of his thrift store denim jacket in the side mirror of his used SUV, exhaling slowly as he checked the time again. 4:57 p.m. Just a few minutes early. The restaurant was a small, artsy cafe downtown, the Paper Fig, suggested by his first match, Veronica. Her messages had been brief but polite. Corporate analyst liked order, precision, structure. She didn't ask many questions about him, but she responded quickly and scheduled the date with efficiency. He'd taken that as a good sign. But this wasn't just his date. Nadia sat in the back seat, swinging her legs in patterned tights and holding her trusty sketch pad. She looked up at him in the mirror, her expression curious. "Is she nice?" Nadia asked. "I hope so," James replied, keeping his tone even. "Do you think she'll like me?" He paused. "She'll like you," he said gently. "You're impossible not to like." Nadia grinned and zipped up her navy blue jacket. "Do I have to be quiet like in church?" James smiled. "No, just be you. That's more than enough." They walked in together. The cafe was cozy, filled with the scent of roasted espresso and warm cinnamon. Light jazz played over the speakers, and plants hung from the ceiling in little glass orbs. It was peaceful, intimate, perfect, he thought. Veronica spotted him first. She was seated by the window, her posture arrow straight, a sleek burgundy blazer framing her slender figure. A tablet sat beside her cappuccino, and she was typing something rapidly before she noticed him approaching. James smiled. "Veronica?" She stood and extended her hand, her handshake firm and quick. "James. Right on time." He gestured toward Nadia. "This is my daughter, Nadia." Veronica blinked, her polite smile flickering momentarily before reasserting itself. "Oh, I wasn't aware she would be joining us. I always bring her along when I meet someone new," he said calmly. "She's part of the package." Veronica glanced at her watch before forcing a tight smile. "Of course." They sat. James helped Nadia into her seat and handed her the colored pencils he brought from home. She quietly began sketching on her lap. Veronica folded her hands. "So, tell me about your work. You said you're a freelance consultant." "Yes," James replied. "I mostly build back-end systems for small businesses. It keeps me busy." She tilted her head. "And steady income? I imagine that must be challenging, especially with a child." James nodded. "We manage." There was a pause. She reached for her menu, but didn't open it. "Well, I hope you won't mind, but I prefer to split the bill. I think it sets a better tone." "Not at all," James said, though he hadn't offered to pay yet. She relaxed slightly, then eyed Nadia. "Is she always this quiet?" James smiled at his daughter, who was busy drawing a cat flying a spaceship. "She's focused, but she'll talk your ear off about animals if you ask." Veronica laughed lightly, but there was no warmth in it. I don't usually go out with single dads." "It's admirable what you're doing, though." "What I'm doing?" "You know," she said, stirring her coffee, "raising a child on your own. Managing, well, with what you have. It takes resilience." James leaned back slightly, absorbing the tone. It wasn't admiration. It was subtle condescension. She didn't see him as an equal. She saw him as a project, or worse, a walking setback. "I appreciate that," he said evenly. She glanced around the cafe. "So, no family nearby to help out?" "No," he replied. "It's mostly just me and Nadia." Veronica nodded. "That's noble. I just think kids are a lot of responsibility. And you never know what you're walking into when you date someone with a child." James nodded slowly. "That's true. But you also get to see how much love someone can give when they've already given their heart away once." She didn't reply to that. Instead, she turned to the waitress who had just arrived. "I'll have the kale salad, dressing on the side." James ordered the soup. Nadia asked for a grilled cheese, not looking up from her drawing. The meal was quick. Veronica glanced at her watch more than she looked at James. Her questions became increasingly pragmatic. "Do you own or rent?" "Rent," James answered, leaving out that he owned 3 properties and currently rented his estate to himself through a shell company. "How do you handle school pickups?" "I work remotely. Flexible hours." "That's convenient," she said, her voice bordering on skeptical. By the end of the meal, the conversation had turned transactional. Veronica brought out her phone and began answering work emails as they waited for the check. She looked up once to say, "Well, this was nice. Good to meet you both." "Nice to meet you too," James said, standing and helping Nadia down. They walked to the car in silence. Nadia held his hand tightly. Once they were buckled in, James asked softly, "You okay?" Nadia looked out the window, then turned to him. She was like a math test. James laughed, a short, surprised burst, and nodded. "She didn't really see you," Nadia added. "She kept looking at you, but not in you." You know. He did know. And hearing his daughter say it only deepened the ache. "Well," he said, starting the engine, "first tries don't always work out." Nadia smiled and pulled out her sketch pad. "That's okay. I already drew her with cat ears. She looks better." James laughed again, this time with warmth, and drove them home through the falling dusk, grateful for the one person who never needed him to pretend. The weather was gentle that afternoon. Gray clouds like soft wool draped across the sky, and the air held a cool stillness that hinted at coming rain. James stood outside the local botanical garden, glancing toward the entrance gate where families and couples trickled in and out. The scent of damp earth and honeysuckle filled the air, calming his nerves just a little. He held Nadia's hand. She wore a yellow raincoat with frogs on the buttons and her ever-present sketchbook tucked under one arm. "What's her name again?" Nadia asked, tilting her head. "Cassandra," James replied. "She works in publishing. She said she loves nature and poetry." "Does she like kids?" James hesitated. "She says she does." Nadia nodded thoughtfully, as if making a checklist in her head. At exactly 2 p.m., Cassandra arrived. She was petite and graceful, dressed in a beige trench coat and olive green scarf. Her wavy hair framed her face softly, and she had a reusable coffee cup in hand. James recognized her from the photo, but in person, her expression carried something different. An air of studied empathy, like someone constantly preparing to say, "I'm so sorry to hear that." "James?" she asked, stepping closer with a kind smile. "That's me," he said, offering a hand. "And this is Nadia." Cassandra's eyes widened. Oh my goodness. Look at you, sweetheart." She crouched down, smiling at Nadia in a way that was almost too cheerful. "Aren't you just precious?" "Hi," Nadia replied, shifting slightly behind her dad's leg. Cassandra stood again. "I didn't realize you'd be bringing her," she said to James in a lowered tone, still smiling. "I like for her to be involved. She's the best judge of character I know." Cassandra laughed, a short, breathy sound. "That's sweet. Really sweet. You're doing such an amazing job, raising her all on your own." "Thanks," James said evenly. "We're managing." As they walked into the garden together, Cassandra chatted about her work, editing romance novels for a mid-sized publisher, working from home, deadlines, and difficult authors. She spoke in bright, polished phrases, like someone always on a first date. "Do you get any help from your parents?" she asked suddenly, glancing toward Nadia. "No," James replied. "It's just us." Cassandra sighed audibly. "That must be so hard. I just can't imagine. We found our rhythm." "I mean, don't get me wrong," she said quickly. "Single dads are heroes, truly. But it's just, I imagine it must be exhausting. The financial pressure, the loneliness. Do you even get time for yourself?" James arched an eyebrow, but kept walking. "I get enough," he said. They passed through a rose-covered archway, and Nadia ran ahead to a small pond filled with koi. She knelt down, sketchpad balanced on one knee, watching the fish glide under the surface. "She's beautiful," Cassandra said, following James's gaze. "There's this melancholy about her. You can tell she's been through something." James turned toward her slowly. "She's thoughtful. She's observant. But she's also happy. She's not some sad story." Cassandra blinked. "Oh no, I didn't mean to imply. Of course she's happy. I just mean there's this depth to her. It's touching." James nodded, tight-lipped. Cassandra opened her tote bag and pulled out a small wrapped box. "I brought something for her. I hope that's okay." James watched as she walked over to Nadia and handed her the box. Nadia looked up at her father. James nodded. Inside was a glittery pink pencil case with cartoon animals on it. Nadia smiled politely. Thank you. I figured you didn't have many nice supplies, Cassandra said gently. Now you can feel like the other girls at school. Nadia's face shifted. Not angry, just confused. I already have markers and pencils, she said. But I'll use this too. Of course you do, Cassandra laughed nervously. I just thought, little joys. They continued walking. The conversation began to lag. James tried to redirect. So, what made you want to meet in a garden? Oh, I find it calming. Especially when life feels chaotic. Don't you think it's important to stay grounded when you're struggling? James stopped walking. I wouldn't describe our life as struggling. Cassandra stopped too, flustered. Oh, I didn't mean it like that. Look, I think what you're doing is incredible. Noble. And I just want to say, I admire you for making it work. Thank you, James said, his tone cool now. But I'm not looking for admiration. Or sympathy. Or to be congratulated for doing what every parent should do. She hesitated. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm just being too sensitive. I read stories like yours all the time, and it just hits me emotionally. James looked over at Nadia, who was now climbing a stone bench to get a better view of a red hibiscus. She's not a story. She's my daughter. The conversation didn't recover. The rest of the walk was filled with forced smiles and too many compliments that felt like rehearsed lines from a parenting blog. When they reached the parking lot, Cassandra hugged him loosely. Well, this was lovely. You're both really inspirational. James nodded, his hands in his pockets. Take care, Cassandra. They got in the car. Nadia strapped herself in silently, still holding the pencil case in her lap. Halfway through the drive home, she said, She talked like we were sad puppies. James glanced at her, amused but heartsore. You noticed that too? She said I looked like I didn't have markers. That's weird, right? It is, James agreed. Nadia looked out the window. I didn't feel small before today, but now I kinda do. James reached over and gently squeezed her hand. You're not small. You're everything. She nodded, quiet again. A moment later, she opened her sketchbook and began drawing. James didn't look at another dating profile for 3 days after that. The Saturday sun filtered through the windows of the Clover Room, a quaint brunch bistro nestled between a flower shop and an antique bookstore. Its whitewashed brick walls and mismatched wooden chairs gave it a rustic charm, and soft classical piano music played overhead. A vase of wild daisies sat on each table, and the air smelled faintly of vanilla and rosemary. James and Nadia arrived 10 minutes early. It had become routine, scouting the table, letting Nadia pick the seat she liked best, and ordering her a warm apple cider to keep her busy while they waited. Today's date was with Sandra. Sandra was different from the others. Her photos had been glamorous, high fashion, lots of professional angles, frequent exotic backgrounds. She was an Instagram influencer, mostly in the fashion and travel space. But their chat had been surprisingly light and friendly. She had said she was tired of superficial people. I want something grounded, she'd written. James had hoped she meant it. He sat across from Nadia, who sipped her cider and sketched the waiter's beard, whispering, It looks like clouds got lost on his face. James chuckled and ruffled her curls. At exactly 10:32 a.m., Sandra entered. Heads turned. She walked in confidently, in towering heels and a silk blouse tucked into high-waisted designer jeans. Her hair was sleek and immaculately styled, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She looked more suited to a red carpet than a small brunch cafe. She spotted James and waved. Her stride slowed as she reached the table, her eyes falling on Nadia. Oh, she said, blinking. You brought your child. James stood to greet her. Sandra, this is Nadia. I believe I mentioned her. You said you were a single dad, she replied, sitting delicately. I assumed that meant you have a child, not that she'd be joining us. I find it better to be upfront, James said, sliding her a menu. She's part of my life. It's important that anyone I meet understands that from the start. Sandra forced a tight smile, her gaze shifting to Nadia, who looked up from her sketchbook with a polite, unreadable expression. Well, Sandra said, flipping open the menu. Isn't this cozy? James watched her eyes scan the room, noting the casual atmosphere, the simple decor. She picked up a cloth napkin like it might bite her. "So," she said, "you're a software freelancer?" "Yes," James replied calmly. "Mostly back-end systems. I like the freedom it gives me to spend time with Nadia." "How quaint," Sandra said, stirring her water with the straw. "That must be a creative way to get by." James caught the hint of condescension but didn't bite. "I make it work," he said. "We're comfortable." "Comfortable," she repeated as if tasting the word. "You know, it's funny. Most of the men I meet are chasing big things. Power, influence. You seem content." "That's rare." "It's intentional," James said. "I've had the big things. Right now, I'm chasing peace." Sandra blinked. "That's poetic." She glanced at Nadia again and leaned toward James. "Can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course." "Do you bring her on every date?" James nodded. "I've only been on 2 before this." "But yes, every one. And you don't think that's off-putting?" James sat back. "For who?" "Well, for a potential partner. It's hard to be romantic with a child watching." "I'm not trying to impress anyone romantically in the first hour," he said. "I'm trying to see who respects my daughter being here." Sandra let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "That's very noble. But don't you think she might be getting attached to strangers too quickly? Or worse, seeing how women react when they're not exactly maternal?" Nadia's pencil paused. James's jaw flexed. "She's not here to be tested. And she's not fragile. She's smarter than most adults I know." Sandra leaned back, crossing her legs. "I'm just being real. Dating with a child changes things. It's not like you're some bachelor with a clean slate." James gave her a long, measured look. "You're right. I'm not. I have a daughter. I have scars. And I have no interest in pretending that's a disadvantage." The waiter arrived just then. Sandra didn't even glance at the menu. "Actually, I'm going to have to cut this short," she said, reaching into her purse for her phone. "Something just came up. A call with a brand manager. I can't miss it." James glanced at the nearly untouched water and the menu she hadn't read. "Of course," he said softly. Sandra stood quickly, brushing off her blouse. This was eye-opening. "You're a good man, James. And she's sweet." Nadia waved half-heartedly. "Bye." Sandra gave a small wave and turned toward the door. 2 minutes passed. Then 5. Then 10. James finally flagged down the waiter to cancel her order, though she hadn't made one. He shook his head and looked at Nadia. "She forgot her purse," Nadia said. James blinked. "She did." "No," Nadia said. "I was joking. She forgot her soul." James laughed, loud and honest this time. The tension drained from his shoulders. "You okay?" he asked her. Nadia shrugged. She wasn't mean. Just empty. Like one of those chocolate eggs that's hollow inside. That's one way to describe it. "Can we get waffles before we go?" "Absolutely." As they waited, Nadia drew a picture of a tall woman in high heels stepping into a spaceship labeled Planet Me. Beneath it, in her scribbled handwriting, she wrote, "She took off early." James smiled to himself, grateful once again for the tiny, fierce artist sitting across from him. And even more grateful that they had left the table a trio and returned as just the 2 of them. Together. Whole. It was a Tuesday evening in early spring, the kind of evening that teased summer. The sky was lavender, fading into deep navy, and the cafe James had chosen was quiet. Small tables under string lights, the murmur of distant traffic blending with faint acoustic guitar music. He had made the reservation for 3, as always. Nadia walked beside him in her canvas sneakers, holding a paper folder stuffed with origami animals. "You think this one's going to be normal?" she asked, as if she were the parent and he the hopeful child. "I think we're due for a good one," James replied, adjusting the cuff of his second-hand flannel shirt. "Or at least someone who doesn't talk like she's at a sad commercial," Nadia added, her eyes narrowing with practiced suspicion. James chuckled. "Let's keep an open mind." She smirked. "I'll try." Their table was at the edge of the outdoor patio, tucked under a vine-covered archway. James helped Nadia into her seat and ordered her a mint lemonade. She took out her origami dragon and perched it in front of her place, setting like a sentinel. Then Diana arrived. She was punctual, her approach crisp and calculated. From the moment she stepped into view, sleek black slacks, ivory blouse, minimalist jewelry, she looked like she belonged in a boardroom. Her expression was pleasant, but her eyes flicked between James and Nadia with cool assessment. "James," she said with a tight smile, extending a hand. "Nice to meet you." "And you," James replied, standing. "This is Nadia." Diana glanced at the girl and nodded. "Hello, Nadia. I've heard a lot about you." Nadia tilted her head. "From where?" James coughed softly to cover his amusement. Diana slid into her chair and pulled out her phone, not to check messages, but to open an app. James noticed. "Taking notes already?" Diana looked up. "Oh, just my compatibility checklist. It helps me stay focused during first dates. I like structure." James blinked. "A checklist? It's not as cold as it sounds," she said brightly. "It's just a guide. I've dated enough to know what works for me." Nadia leaned toward her dad and whispered audibly, "We're being graded." Diana offered a strained laugh. "So, James, you said you're a freelance software developer." "Yes. I mostly work with local businesses on custom back-end systems." She nodded and tapped something into her phone. "Flexible hours. That's a plus. Do you own your home or rent?" James took a sip of his water. "Renting at the moment." Another tap. "Any long-term debt?" James raised an eyebrow. "I didn't realize we were doing financials." "Transparency is essential," Diana replied. "It's better to get the big conversations out of the way early." Nadia whispered, "I don't like this test." James smiled faintly. "What about you, Diana? What brings you here?" She relaxed a little. "I've done the ambitious dating scene. I've dated bankers, lawyers, a surgeon twice. All of them had the checklist qualities, but no real foundation. Now I'm looking for someone dependable, emotionally available, and ideally stable." "Stable?" James echoed. "Yes. Not necessarily wealthy. Just in control of their life. No drama. No surprises. Nothing messy." Nadia piped up. "So no glitter?" Diana smiled at her, puzzled. "No glitter." "Messy," Nadia said, nodding. James laughed into his napkin. Their waiter arrived. Diana ordered an arugula salad with no cheese and sparkling water. James ordered roasted chicken. Nadia requested a burger and fries, grinning defiantly. As the waiter left, Diana turned back to James. "How do you discipline Nadia?" James blinked. "Excuse me?" "Parenting style. It's crucial for compatibility." "Gentle parenting? Authoritative? Permissive?" James glanced at his daughter. "We listen to each other. I set boundaries. She pushes them. Then we talk about it." Diana hesitated. "That sounds vague." "It works for us." She typed again. "Would you be open to having more children?" she asked next. Nadia raised her eyebrows dramatically and mouthed, "Whoa." James leaned back. "Possibly with the right person. But I'm not in a hurry to expand the family." "Religious views? Private? Political alignment?" James smiled. "Let's call that a second date topic." Diana tapped her phone a final time, and then set it down. "You're very charming. You score well on emotional intelligence and communication. I'll admit I'm intrigued. But I do have one concern." "What's that?" "You seem content as you are. Most people are looking to grow, financially, socially. I get the impression you're coasting." James sat still for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I spent years building something big. Made more money than I could ever need. Lost my wife in the middle of it. Since then, I've been building something smaller, but more meaningful. If that looks like coasting, I'm okay with it." Diana studied him. "I appreciate the honesty," she said. "I think you're lovely. I'm not sure if we're a fit, but I'll consider it." When the check came, she insisted they split it precisely. James didn't argue. As they walked back to the parking lot, Diana said, "Thank you for your time. And Nadia, it was a pleasure to meet you." "You too," Nadia replied, less enthusiastically. Diana climbed into her sleek silver sedan, waved once, and drove away. James opened the car door for Nadia and helped her inside. She sat down with a sigh, kicking her feet slightly before speaking. "Daddy," she said, "that lady wasn't bad. She was just made of numbers." James laughed quietly. "That's one way to put it. She didn't ask me about my dragons." "No," he agreed. "She didn't ask about you at all." Nadia pulled her seatbelt across and clicked it in place. "Can we go get real ice cream now? Real as in sprinkles, rainbow, no checklists." "Absolutely." As they drove off into the soft glow of early night, James felt something shift inside him. Not bitterness, just clarity. What he wanted, what he and Nadia deserved, wasn't someone who fit a formula. It was someone who saw the mess and called it beautiful. The rain came early that day. It wasn't the kind that screamed down in torrents or clattered like nails on windows. It was soft, steady, and persistent, like a lullaby. The clouds had arrived mid-morning and never left. The streets glistened with thin puddles, and tree branches bowed gently under the weight of the mist. James hadn't planned to go out again. Not after Diana and her compatibility app. He had nearly deleted the dating profile the night before. Nearly. His hand hovered over the deactivate button while Nadia slept upstairs, curled around her stuffed dragon like it was a lifeline. But something, a small, absurd whisper of hope, stopped him. One last match had come in that morning. A woman named Jasmine. Her profile was unassuming. No high-definition portraits or filtered vacation photos. Just a candid picture of her in front of a bookshelf, messy bun, and a sweater with a tea stain. She'd written, "Librarian. Lover of stories, thunderstorms, and imperfect people. If you have a child, you already have my attention." James stared at the line for nearly 5 minutes. Then he typed, "I have one. And she's everything." Jasmine responded with a smiley face and a time. For PM. Morrow Street Library Cafe. Bring your daughter if she likes origami. I'm awful at it but determined to learn. Smiley face. And so here they were. The small library cafe was nestled inside an old converted train station. Warm light glowed from vintage hanging lamps, and the air smelled of wet leaves, paper, and cinnamon. The soft hum of conversation filled the space, mixed with the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. James pushed open the creaky door and held it for Nadia, whose hair was slightly damp under the hood of her purple raincoat. She immediately froze. There, at the back corner table, sat a woman with a paper crane in one hand and a look of absolute concentration on her face. A small pile of crumpled failed attempts surrounded her mug like tiny fallen soldiers. Her eyes were focused, lips pursed, tongue slightly out at the corner of her mouth. Nadia whispered, "She's terrible at that." James chuckled. "Let's go say hi." They approached. Jasmine looked up, startled, then broke into a smile so wide and unpretentious it almost startled James. "You must be Nadia," she said immediately, standing. "And you must be James. I'm Jasmine. Clearly, I'm the one who needs folding lessons." Nadia stepped forward, intrigued despite herself. "You made the wing backward." Jasmine looked at the mangled crane. "Is that what went wrong? I thought I invented a new bird." Nadia gave her a faint smile. "It's fixable." Jasmine's eyes lit up. "Will you show me?" Without waiting for an answer, Nadia pulled a sheet from her folder and sat beside her. James blinked. His daughter had never warmed up that fast. Not with strangers. Not with dates. He sat across from them, watching the unlikely scene unfold. Nadia slowly guided Jasmine through the folds, correcting her with gentle taps and half-whispers. Jasmine didn't just nod and pretend to listen. She focused like it mattered. Like she was learning magic. When they paused, Jasmine looked at James. "So," she said, "you're real." "I wasn't sure." "Real enough," James replied. "And the freelance software thing, is that a clever cover for international espionage or just actually software?" He smiled. "Just software." "Shame," she said. "I was hoping for at least some mystery." Their conversation flowed like rain on glass, soft, rhythmic, and soothing. Jasmine talked about how she ran the children's story hour at the library, How she tried to make every story a little performance. How she'd never been married. How she'd helped raise her sister's kids for a while after a messy divorce. "I know a good dad when I see one," she said, glancing at Nadia, who was now folding 2 cranes at once like a magician. "And I know what it looks like when someone's showing up because they have to. You're not that. You show up because you want to." James wasn't used to compliments that didn't come with expectations. This one settled into his chest like warmth. "I've had some complicated dates," he admitted. Jasmine's expression softened. "Let me guess. The overachiever. The pity princess. The brand ambassador." He laughed. "You've met them too?" "I dated one guy who asked for my credit score before dessert," she said, sipping her latte. "And one who called my job cute." James smiled, a quiet kind that lived more in the eyes than the lips. "You're different." Jasmine tilted her head. "Is that good different or therapist different?" "Good," he said. "Rare." She looked at Nadia again, who was lining up a row of paper animals on the table. "She's lovely," Jasmine said quietly. "She doesn't feel like a kid dragged to adult things. She belongs in your world." "She is my world," James said, his voice roughening slightly. Jasmine nodded. "I know." A pause settled between them, but it was comfortable, like breath after a long-held note. After an hour, Jasmine pulled a wrapped cookie from her bag and slid it across the table. "I brought a peace offering in case the date was awkward. But since it wasn't, maybe it's just dessert." Nadia unwrapped it, sniffed, and whispered, "Cinnamon." "Good call." James looked at the woman in front of him, who was now helping Nadia fold a paper fox, making up stories for its origin as she worked, and felt something that startled him. Ease, warmth, and a flicker of something he'd buried years ago, hope. As they got up to leave, the rain had finally stopped. Jasmine walked them to their car, laughing as Nadia showed her how to fold a frog that could actually jump. At the door, Jasmine paused. "I'd like to see you again," she said, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. "Both of you. If that's okay." James nodded. "It is." Nadia added, "You get a gold star." Jasmine bowed slightly. "High praise." She turned to walk down the street, her shoes tapping gently on the wet pavement. James watched her until she vanished around the corner. He opened the car door for Nadia, helped her inside, and sat behind the wheel. Before starting the engine, he looked over at the seat where Jasmine had sat, now empty but echoing with laughter and folded wings. "You think she's the one?" Nadia asked. "I don't know yet," he said. "But she didn't ask about my job. Or our money. Or if I'm broken." Nadia nodded. "She asked about my fox." James started the car, the dashboard lights casting a quiet glow. "Then maybe," he said, "she's already passing the only test that matters." 3 weeks. That's how long it had been since the origami fox, the cinnamon cookie, and Jasmine's crooked crane. 3 weeks of slow walks in the park, of movie nights with popcorn and couch forts, of long, quiet conversations once Nadia was asleep, about grief and joy and the strange middle place between. Jasmine had become part of the rhythm, like she'd always been meant to fit there. She and Nadia read books together, folded paper animals, argued over which Pixar movie had the saddest ending. James didn't rush it, he couldn't afford to. But in his heart, something had already shifted. He trusted her. And that scared him more than he expected. Because he hadn't told her. Not yet. It was a warm Sunday afternoon, sunlight filtering through high clouds like gold dust. James stood on the front steps of his estate, nervously adjusting the collar of his shirt. The wrought iron gates had been opened. The stone driveway had been freshly cleaned. The ivy climbing the columns had been trimmed. Everything looked honest, regal but not boastful, alive but not cold. The truth. Nadia sat cross-legged near the garden path, braiding daisies into a crooked crown. She looked up at him, squinting into the sunlight. "She's gonna be surprised, huh?" James chuckled, hands in his pockets. "You think she'll be mad?" Nadia shrugged. "Depends. Did you lie or just not tell?" "Doesn't feel much different right now." Nadia handed him the flower crown. "Then you better look extra charming." James placed it on his head with a grin. How do I look? Like a nervous flower king. Before he could respond, a car pulled up outside the gate, an old teal hatchback with a sun-faded bumper sticker that read books are just portable worlds. Jasmine stepped out, shielding her eyes from the sun. She wore jeans, a worn cardigan, and her ever-present curiosity. Her eyes lifted from the gravel drive to the sweeping garden, the mansion beyond, and finally, James, standing there with guilt in his chest. She approached slowly, her boots crunching the stones beneath her. "Did I take a wrong turn into a BBC drama?" she asked, half laughing, though her brows were raised. James exhaled. "Jasmine, there's something I need to tell you." She stopped just a few feet from him. Nadia stood now, watching, the quiet breeze tugging at her curls. "I haven't been completely honest," James continued. "I told you I was a freelance developer. That I rent. That Nadia and I live modestly." Jasmine's eyes were sharp now. No anger, but alert. Processing. James took a breath. "I'm not broke. I'm not struggling. This house is mine. This land, the company, the fortune, it's all mine. I've spent the last several years pretending to be smaller than I am, because when I show people this," he gestured at the estate, "they stop seeing me. They see numbers. Control. Expectation." Jasmine looked up at the house again, then back at him. "Why now?" she asked softly. "Because I trust you," he said. "And because if this whatever this is between us is real, I owe you everything. Not the disguise. The truth." He looked at her then, really looked, prepared for anger. For disappointment. For the fragile thing they'd built to crack and fall apart. But Jasmine simply crossed her arms and let out a breath through her nose. "I knew something was off," she said. "You were too good at hiding it, but Nadia slipped up once. She said something about the elevator room, and I thought, that doesn't sound like an apartment feature." James blinked. "You suspected?" She stepped closer. "I thought maybe you were just being private. I didn't push. Because I wanted you to tell me in your own time." She looked around. "This place, it's beautiful. But it's not what made me say yes." James swallowed hard. "Then what did?" Jasmine smiled. "You. And her." Nadia walked over and tugged at her hand. "Want to see the greenhouse?" Jasmine looked down at her, eyes misting. More than anything. James stood still as they walked ahead. Nadia leading her toward the back garden with the ease of someone who trusted her completely. Then Jasmine turned and called over her shoulder. "But just so we're clear, you owe me one more Crane lesson." He laughed, heart pounding with relief. "You got it." That night, they had dinner under the willow tree in the back garden. Just the three of them, paper cranes strung through the branches above, swaying gently in the summer breeze. Jasmine didn't ask about money, or the company, or how many cars he owned. She asked about his favorite childhood book. She asked Nadia about her dream vacation. And James, he sat there, daisy crown long gone, replaced with something better. Peace. Real peace. 1 year later, the willow tree stood tall, its long green tendrils swaying gently in the wind, exactly where it had always stood. But something about it looked different now. Maybe it was the white ribbon strung through the branches. Maybe it was the scattering of lanterns across the grass, glowing like captured stars. Or maybe it was the way Nadia skipped barefoot between rows of folding chairs, holding a bouquet of paper flowers she had made herself. Each one folded from pages of her favorite books, each one cradling a tiny origami animal in its center. James stood under the arch, dressed in a navy suit, not tailored, not flashy, just him. There was no tie, no podium, no ceremony written by lawyers or pressed into scripts. Just a handwritten vow folded neatly in his pocket, and a heart that no longer hid behind modesty or fear. Jasmine walked toward him barefoot, wearing a soft cream dress and a crown of real daisies. The same flowers Nadia once braided on a nervous Sunday afternoon. She didn't walk alone. Nadia held her hand all the way down the aisle. There were no flashbulbs, no gold-plated invitations, just a few close friends, the scent of honeysuckle, and the sound of wind through the leaves. As Jasmine reached James, Nadia let go and stepped beside them, her smile wide and proud, her eyes bright with the certainty of someone who'd seen this love grow from the ground up. Jasmine leaned close and whispered, "No more secrets?" "No more masks," James whispered back. "Just this. Just us." They exchanged vows under the tree that had seen all their beginnings. No grandeur, just truth. Nadia presented the rings, both tied around the neck of a folded origami fox. Her own design. When they kissed, Nadia cheered the loudest, cupping her hands like a trumpet and shouting, "Finally!" Laughter rippled across the garden. That night, they danced under the stars, Nadia spinning in circles, Jasmine resting her head on James's shoulder as they swayed barefoot on the dewy grass. James looked out over the lawn, past the candles and cranes and guests, toward the quiet hills beyond the estate. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to hide anything. Not the house, not the past, not the man he'd become. Because love had finally come to him, not disguised, not chasing wealth or reputation, but wrapped in paper animals, silly laughter, library cardigans, and the fierce, unwavering belief of a little girl who knew what real love looked like before anyone else did. And this time, he hadn't needed to chase it. He just needed to be ready when it came. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.